Welcome to Friday night's video in our second Master Series. I do believe this is the 62nd video in our second Master Series, the 11th video in our basic processors, and the 10th video on equalizers. So basically what we're going to talk about now is the dynamic EQ. Now, multi-band dynamics, we'll be dealing with this when we talk about compressors. So don't get all upset because I didn't include multi-band dynamics while we're talking about dynamic EQs, because they are a valid argument with dynamic EQs, but you have to kind of understand that basically this separates things into band widths. That's a little bit different than a dynamic EQ that's dealing with nodes in different ways, but it can have the same type of effects. So I don't dissuade you from putting this in that category also and utilizing them in the same way. So if yours will, then that's great. But we will talk about multi-band dynamics when we talk about compressors. So when we talk about dynamic EQs, I mean, I've got like this free one from TDR Nova that I got when it first came out. It was a pretty cool one. It did some pretty cool stuff. And so I downloaded it, and I still keep it around. It's a pretty cool EQ. And this is a free one. They have some paid versions that are a bit better, but my main go-to dynamic EQ is my Ozone. Now, I love my Ozone products. I just do. So because I buy them in a package and they all do pretty good so far, and the ones that are having problems, I figure out what the problems are from testing them, and I make adjustments. But so far, they've been pretty good to me. So let's talk about the dynamic EQ. The first thing we want to talk about with the dynamic equalizer is where this is most important. So the biggest argument for dynamic EQs is dynamic EQs can help preserve that life aspect, because you've got like vocals are a prime argument for dynamic EQ. They're alive. The power of them changes from from the different types of articulations, pronunciations, the way they're singing in different areas. That that the dynamic EQ combined with automation is a prime argument for dynamic equalization. And also, dynamic equalizers can breathe life into things that don't have that much life. Like I got a bass line. Dum, 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 dum. It's all the same volume, all the same level, and nothing. A dynamic EQ can breathe some life into that. It really can. Without fussing with it too much, you can breathe a little bit of life into it. It's giving it a little bit of boost and help, boost in the area a little bit. Every now and then it's kind of breathe a little more life into it. It sounds more lifelike. And it's, maybe not too lifelike to where it sounds bad, you know what I'm saying? But, it's given a little bit of life, because, life isn't like this, I'm all limited. Here's a prime example that, you got the difference between using a limiter on something and a compressor. Like a static EQ is like a limiter. I'm going to attenuate this much and then 12,000 pounds of brick on it. It's done to that level right there. That's like a limiting EQ. Whereas a dynamic EQ is more loose like a noodle, bro. I mean, it's more loose like a noodle, and the thing's alive. The singer isn't like this because trying to exactly these things. It's where he's more loose, and the dynamic EQ lets it breathe a little bit, lets it goes outside of the constraints a little bit, and lets it allow it to breathe a little bit, and allows it to retain more of its life in the changing power of what's happening. So I know that sounds like a funny example, but it's a huge argument for dynamic EQ, especially in two different areas where life is prominent, like vocals. Vocals, you can't escape that. Life is in your vocal tract. You can't get rid of it. I mean, it's just there unless you just, you can process it to where you sucked all the life out of it, but it's alive, bro. And you've got the reverse of that, to where you've got something that's really static, like a synth or a bass line or something that's just really got no life, that you can breathe some life into it with a dynamic EQ. So these are two huge areas for you to really think about, and really keep in mind that limiter equalization like we're doing in the last video, and this other type of equalization that allows some life and lets it breathe a little bit, loose like a noodle or limit it up, bro. And that, I know it sounds funny, but it will really help you to understand the value of dynamic EQs at any of the stages that we talked about when we're doing EQ. They're invaluable. And whether or not you're doing downwards compression to try to catch. There's too much power coming up there, and it's setting up at certain bands, but every now and then I get a little bit too much power coming up there and it's pushing through, and I've got a little bit of compression on there just in case something really powerful hits it that gives it a little bit extra push, like a dynamics, like a multi-band dynamics that's helping contain that a little bit. And there's the reverse of that to where it can be going the other way, to where it's pushing up. So now it's hitting it, and you've got some light power, and it's letting it push up a little bit. It's actually boosting it a little bit for weak parts. The heavy parts are hitting it, but the weak parts are hitting it, and it's giving it a little bit of a push up. And either way, that this can really help breathe some life into, or preserve life in your tracks. And also things like when you're doing the equal loudness contour, it can breathe life. I've got the equal loudness contour, let's say, going here, and I've got it boosting here. I've got it boosting up here a little bit, and then I've got it attenuating between 2 and 5, and I've got this set up to where, how I've got it set up on my, on this, and, I've got this going like this, but, it's going to breathe life. And on one of them, I can be having it push up on it, or I can have it be pushing down. On some of them, I can have it be doing differently, and experiment with that, because the issue here with what's happening, that it can help breathe life into the work you're doing. So you've got one pushing down, one pushing up, and it's just helping you fine tune and preserving the life in it. And the same thing can go with when you're doing your, attenuating and boost equalization in your stages, and even with your high and low pass filters or your self EQs, any one of them, that it can be helping retain some life or giving a little bit of life. So it's a huge argument of how valuable that is. But to me, it's pretty cut and dry. To me, when I have really lifelike audio, that I will go after them with my static EQ, and then if it starts sounding too brick walled, I'll come behind it, do the same thing with my dynamics EQ to help bring that life back into it, which may sound time consuming. You've got how many equalizers do you have on that track? A lot, bro. As I practice and I get used to using it and doing it, that it seems like a lot sometimes, but it can do some really, really, get your stuff to that next level. And instruments that I have that sound too static, that just don't have no life, that I want to breathe some life into them, so I go after it with my dynamic EQ to try to get some life going on there, some attenuating, some boosting, some compression, some upwards compression or expansion, that's kind of fussing with the power of what's happening throughout the performance, that's breathing a little life into it, which is like, this is going to become very integral in you really evaluating, like your when we talked about doing our flow editing, and we're doing our compression stage and things like that. This really starts crossing those boundaries to where, as you go through your workflow, a lot of times you're going back. I did my compression, but now I'm going back to my equalization, and I'm going, so now how did that affect that? And now do I have to go after it with some dynamic EQ to try and bring some life back into it, because I've compressed it a little bit because it really needed to be, because it's just bouncing around too much. But now I've sucked the life out of it, and I'm going to get out my dynamic EQ and start trying to we eke a little bit more life back into it, so it doesn't sound so static and brick walled. Does that make sense? Which in some cases that sounds great, and in some cases it doesn't. If some certain productions, I will compress the heck out of stuff, and I don't care. It sounds great like that. Some things don't, and especially things that are sitting on the top, things that are sitting on top. Sometimes it's okay to squish the heck out of them and there's no life there. It's just, a heavy metal song or something. I don't know. But some things, a little bit of life is a good thing, and it's like it's sitting on top of everything else that may not be projecting as much life. But I certainly want that sitting on the top not to be a heck squished out of it. And I want it to really sound natural and flowing around, and the power moving around, and it giving it not all squished up like it's racked up in duct tape. I want it like wet like a noodle, bro. And to what degree? I got it really super wet like a noodle, or I've squished it up a little bit and it's not limited, but I tightened it up a little bit, but it's still got a little play on it and stuff like that. I know that sounds ridiculous, and I try to make it comical because it's the best way to get it across for you to understand the importance of the dynamic EQ and what a powerful tool it can be to help you preserve the life and or give life to tracks while you're working on them, and the limiting or versus compression kind of thing, or upwards compression, upwards expansion, things like that being brought into the game when your equalization is monumentally helpful to help you achieve that. And that can either be bringing that life in, preserving that life, or adding life to it. And sometimes just, that quote unquote catch all phrase of, a more transparent equalization that isn't so brick wall, that's got some give and take, that allows things to breathe, allows it to get a little wet like a noodle, bro, so it doesn't feel so squished, or so contained, or duct taped up, So I hope that makes sense. Getting into it, we'll talk about compressors later on. And so some of those things will make a little bit more sense to you so that you can apply the upwards compression, upwards expansion, downwards compression, limiting, and things like that in a better way, in a more knowledgeable way, and informed way to your equalization phases that we're talking about here. So at this phase, I've tried to keep it as simple as possible like that. So hopefully that will sink in and get you utilizing your dynamic EQ in those areas and see how valuable they can be. So peace, hope, love. I certainly hope you enjoyed this next video, and I'll see you in the next video.